When I was 13 years old, I had a really awakening experience in my faith journey. My heart was really warmed up, and I was just praying every day, long time, and was rejoicing. No matter what happened, just filled with joy. And I thought that faith will go forever. Well, although I had a strong faith since that time, there were, of course, ups and downs. There were times when I couldn't just rejoice. I had so much difficulty in my life that I was sad rather than rejoicing. Although in gospel or in the Bible language, we can be sad and joyful at the same time. Well, that's the experience of our faith journey. Most of us have ups and downs in our lives. And it seems that the readers of the letter to the Hebrews had a down moment at the time this letter was written. But the letter to the Hebrews is a special or is different from other parts of the Bible in that we don't know the writer and the readers, intended readers of the letter. So we don't know who wrote it, and we don't know who were the first readers, but we know from its content some of the situations that they were facing. These believers had great joy and really had an awakening experience, because he says that they were joyful even under the persecution. They received persecution with joy. But it seems that they were having down moments now. And some of these believers even just left their faith. And others were struggling as well. So the writer is addressing this issue and encouraging them to really get back to the faith, get back to the up moments. And he uses some strategies. First, he just talks about doctrines a lot. In other words, what Jesus has done for us. So by showing that, he's really encouraging them. Well, remember these basics. You have to really go back to the basics. Then he also used the words of encouragement. And today's part reading is really part of the words of the encouragement, which started some paragraphs before, talking about faith mainly. And he says right before today's reading, we are the sort of people who have faith so that our whole being are preserved. So encouraging them with faith, he now talks about the definition or the nature of the faith by saying faith is the reality of what we hope for, the proof of what we don't see. So it is real if it's the reality of what we hope for and the proof of what we don't see. It is this faith that helps us believe what we don't see clearly. When we feel discouraged and we feel, oh, we don't really have something to hold on to, we don't really have much hope. It is faith that keeps our faith hope going. And he gives an example of creation in the faith. He says, we know God created the whole things by his word, from the visible from the invisible. And while he's talking about the creation of the past, by saying the visible from the invisible, he's also talking about the future as well, because our faith is about seeing what is invisible as if it is visible. So our faith in the past really helps our faith for the future. And he gives the examples of others by saying the elders of the past were approved because they showed faith. So he wants to give the faith examples of the people of the past who showed strong faith. And he gives quite a long list and long descriptions of many people. So this part, some people call the hall of fame of the faith. But by calling them, they are missing the point. Calling them this way, missing the point. The writer's point is not really to make the hall of fame. But he just wants to give the examples of some people that whose examples might really encourage these people. So it is not as if these are the best people necessarily, but these incidents that are described about these people really give good encouragement for the situation that they are facing, the readers are facing. And he talks about them more or less chronologically. So he talks about Abel, Enoch, and Noah in order, but he passes them rather briefly. Then he comes to today's reading again, because we didn't read the middle part, to Abraham. And he talks about Abraham in length, because Abraham's example can be quite a big encouragement for the people that he's writing to. It says, by faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was going to receive as an inheritance. He went out without knowing where he was going. He went out without knowing where he was going. When he said where he was going, he was not just talking about the place. Yes, Abraham didn't exactly know where the place was. And when it was revealed later as well, he didn't really know what the place was like. But he's not talking just about the place. He didn't know what he will face in the place. So he was stepping into the future without knowing what future holds. And faith is what enables us to face this uncertainty of the future. Although we don't know what the future holds, because we have faith in God, we can walk with confidence. And as we walk in confidence, we can obey God, because we know God must command the best thing for us. So faith is what enables us to obey God. And it says, by faith, he lived in the land he had been promised as a stranger. And this is the strange part. He goes there with faith, saying, well, God must have really had something good for me. He goes there. God promised that he will inherit the land. He goes there and he doesn't inherit any land. He lives in a tent because he doesn't have land. Indeed, God renews his promises that he will inherit the land in the future, some generations later. And if we know from the history that it took more than 650 years before they inherited the land. So he went there with the faith that God will give this land to me, but he and his descendants had to wait 650 years to inherit the land. And that's why it says he lived in tents with Isaac and Jacob, because Isaac is his son and Jacob is his grandson. And they all had to live with his faith for the future. But they could still live with his faith because he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. In other words, Abraham was sure that God will give them city in the future. So while he lived in tents, he believed that there will be God's city in the future. His inheritance will be God's city. Well, what that city is meant by this writer of the letter to the Hebrews is uncertain. It can be Shiloh, where was God's covenant box when they first conquered the land, or Jerusalem, where the temple was, or he can even refer to the New Jerusalem, which will be the city that God will give to us when Jesus comes back. But whatever the writer of this letter intended, Abraham really didn't know what it was like. He simply just believed that God is going to give something good. He doesn't know what it means, exactly, whether it will happen 600 years later or it will happen even much later or whatever. But he simply believed that God will give the city. And for the city, the architect and the builder is God. Then he talks about Sarah, Abraham's wife, briefly. By faith, even Sarah received the ability to have a child. He mentions this because Abraham's the promise to Abraham was twofold, or even threefolded, but he talks about twofolds here, that he will inherit the land and he will have descendants. Of course, he should have descendants to inherit the land, but not only descendants, but lots of descendants. It says, as countless as the grains of sand on the shore. But he didn't even have a son or a daughter, let alone descendants. So Sarah was barren, but because by faith, they still believed, both Abraham and Sarah believed, that they will have a child if God had promised. And indeed, they had as countless as the grains of sand on the shore, so to speak, so many children. But of course, it didn't really happen in Abraham and Sarah's lifetime either. They just had their sons and grandsons, not really that many descendants, but it's something that will happen in the much later, in the distant future. They still believe and believed with that hope. And all these people died in faith without receiving the promises, but they saw the promises from a distance and welcomed them. So by saying all these people, he means Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, and Jacob that he has mentioned here. And all these people died in faith, meaning that they didn't really see what the promise was, but still had faith that this will happen when they die. They hadn't received what they were promised. But our situation is different, or the writer is saying your situation is different because you have received the promise, namely Jesus Christ. The promise to Abraham was fulfilled through Jesus Christ. So you have received the promise. So you should have stronger faith. You should be in a better position to have faith than Abraham. So you really should have. And they confessed that they were strangers and immigrants on earth. People who say this kind of things make it clear that they are looking for a home. And that homeland, it describes, was a better country that it is a heavenly one. So this is a homeland that they believed will come in God's time. So it is not as if that they wanted to go back to their so-called homeland, their birthplace, but they wanted to go back to a place where God is preparing for them. That's why they could confess that they were strangers and immigrants in this land. And so should we. And in other words, when we know the future glory, we should admit that we are strangers here. We are just living as a passerby in this land because our home is that future home that God is preparing now for us. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God. He has prepared a city. So God isn't ashamed to be called their God. In other words, God is the God of these people who live as strangers in this land, looking forward to the future glory. Or using the terms now by the gospel reading, people waiting for their masters to come home. God is the God of this kind of people. And we should be this kind of people, looking forward to our future glory, rather than be satisfied in this land and settled in this land. And it says God is prepared. He has prepared the city for them. Again, it can mean different levels of city. It can be Shiloh, Jerusalem, or New Jerusalem. But what the writer is emphasizing here is a city for them, he says. He didn't say a city for their descendants. In other words, the writer is believing that there will be even future glory where Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Jacob, all these people will participate, although they are already there. In other words, they will rise from the dead, and we will all rise from the dead to receive this glory, to live in the city that God has prepared. So, in describing this faith, the writer of the letter to the Hebrews makes it clear that the faith of the past is important, namely the faith about the creation, faith in believing what has happened in the Bible. But these are important because it helps us to the faith for the future. It is the faith for the future that makes us keep going. It is because we believe in what will happen when Jesus comes back that gives us strength to go ahead with our journey on this earth. And Abraham is a good example. Abraham had faith when he didn't see the promises. He just went to the land without knowing what will face him. Then when he gets to the land, he realized that he's not going to inherit the land immediately. It is his descendants who will inherit the land, and it will take more than 650 years. Well, he didn't really exactly know the exact time. But all these things really means that faith, we have to see these things with the eyes of faith. When we don't have it yet, we just believe in the promise. And for us, we are in a better position to believe because we have seen the promise fulfilled in Jesus Christ. We have the one level of promises. So we must have stronger faith even than Abraham if we just move on in this. And yet, we are in the same boat as Abraham, because although we saw the promise fulfilled in Jesus Christ, we haven't seen the promise fulfilled completely because we are still awaiting for the second coming. We are still awaiting for the great city called New Jerusalem, where there will be only peace and no conflict. There will be only godliness and not profanity or just blasphemy. And we are looking forward to that time. And the time when we will live forever. So let's hold on to this hope, just as Abraham held on to this hope, even when he doesn't see things clear. And although we know that we will have that glory, we don't know exactly the nature of the glory. So in that sense, we are in the same boat as Abraham on. But if Abraham had faith when he didn't know clearly, so should we. Let's hold on to this faith and move forward because of faith. Glory be to the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.